And once again, good morning, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. This is the 25th anniversary of Patients Out of Time. We're here at the Omni Hotel in Charlottesville, Virginia, doing our best to be COVID precautious. That's why it's kind of scantily staffed here, so to speak. For those of you who joined our gala last night, the music was great. We had a great time. I hope you did too. Today we're going to cover more practical applications here. We'll be talking about some world-class growers, Rob Clarke, Jorge Cervantes, Jeff Lowenfels. We'll be getting into some authors. Michael Green has interviewed several authors, talking about that later, and then end with cannabis preparations and showing you how to, a sample recipe of those things you can do at home. So without further ado, Michael's going to take it over and introduce our first panel of speakers on growing cannabis.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome again, as ML said, to Patients Out Time 25th Anniversary and Gala Celebration. We are pleased and honored to have Rob Clarke, the author of Cannabis, Evolution, Ethnobotany, as our first speaker today, followed by Jorge Cervantes, very well-known grower and author of Marijuana Horticulture, and then the Raj of Roots, Jeff Lowenfels, author of Teaming with Microbes, Teaming with Nutrients, Teaming with Fungi, and most recently, DIY, Auto-Flowering Cannabis. These segments were pre-recorded. We will be following with a discussion between the three authors on the back end. So, Josh, when you're ready, hit it. And let's learn something about the history of cannabis and ethnobotany from Rob Clarke.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you here. I'm Rob Clarke. I'm an ethnobotanist by training, agronomist by employment, and just here to share my cannabis experience with you. Happy Valentine's Day would be good. My journey began in the University of California at Santa Cruz, affectionately known in the day as Uncle Charlie's summer camp, a land of no grades, but you still needed to graduate. So I developed an interest in cannabis at university, as many young people do. And when I needed to graduate, I had the option there of writing an undergraduate dissertation. So I wrote Botany and Ecology of Cannabis. So that, I self-published that. And upon doing that, selling 1,500 copies and getting reviewed in Playboy magazine, a little tiny review, things like that, I realized that people were interested in the subject. So I went on, and I've written a bunch of stuff since, and here I am today. About land races, that's a very interesting topic. It's kind of a hot topic these days. It's one of the cannabis community catchwords, like terpene. That's another one that pops up a lot these days, but maybe we'll touch on those in a bit. Land races are, back up a little bit, I am an ethnobotanist. What ethnobotanists do is basically study the relationships between human cultures and the plants they use. That can be for food, it can be for fiber, or drugs, or in shelter, any number of other uses, whatever they use them for. And that's in general what the field of ethnobotany is. It's the study of the human-plant relationship. Largely through domesticated plants, but also wild plants. And a land race is an endemic variety, a variety that's found in one place of cultivated plants, plants that have been used by humans in that region for an extended period of time. The dynamic there evolutionarily is that you have climate that's from that geographically and climatically unique area, combined with the selective pressures of farmers. In the case of cannabis, whether the farmers were, and their families were more interested in fiber, hemp for fiber, which we'll talk about in a bit, or hemp grains for food, or the drug potentials, medicinally or whatever you choose to use them for. And many times ritual uses, which are important as well. So those are the different selective pressures. You have the sort of constant but somewhat changing climate, and imposed upon that is the aim of the cultivators towards a certain product or a number of products in the case of cannabis. So that's the definition of land races. Their value is that they're the original starting material for all the sinsemilla varieties that people use medicinally and otherwise today. Those were the seeds that came in, imported Colombian and Mexican and Jamaican and Thai weed and all these things that came from the original countries where they were grown by farmers who had cultivated and helped those land races evolve. So that's the foundations for everything we smoke today. Afghan varieties as well. They were for hashish rather than flowers, but yeah, it's all the same. So that's the value today. A lot of them are gone because land races survive because of conservation in situ, on site. When cultures change because of politics or because of the drug industry, cannabis industry in particular, the land races change as well. And a lot of them become extinct. So yeah, that's the dynamic we have as our side of the cannabis culture with the land races. So.
I was muted. With those land races, where have you gone? I mean, I remember at one point you're in Vietnam, Afghanistan. You've literally, I think, traveled the world in doing this. Can you talk about some of your most favorite places?
Yeah, I never went to Afghanistan. I've always wanted to, but no, I traveled mostly in Southeast Asia and China and Himalayan foothills, Japan and Korea. So really an East Asian, South Asian sort of perspective. More recently in Turkey and your East Bloc a bit as well. And what I was doing along those, I was always looking for uses of land races, collecting some seeds, but as an ethnobotanist, I was looking at the relationship between the people who live there and cannabis, whatever they were using it for. And often it was textiles. And that's been a common thread, bad pun, but a common thread through my research is that all these traditional cultures that used cannabis, not all of them, but the vast majority of them also had a textile culture. The Islamic world, Afghanistan, Pakistan, that part of the Islamic world are a bit of an exception. I don't know of any textiles from there. And the vast majority of India, the Himalayan foothills being where cannabis is used for textiles and seed quite a lot. But once again, the land races were what people were using them for. I was more interested in the selective pressures upon those land races. But yeah, that I've been all over the place and a lot of museum work too. It's not just running into the hinterlands. That you try to do that because cannabis culture is dying worldwide. Doesn't matter what you're using the cannabis plant for, it's dying. It's there are some really glimmers of hope. Northern Vietnam, you mentioned, that's a great example. The Hmong people there fell in with foreign aid organizations, you could say, who taught them how to produce for a modern market. And actually homemade Hmong indigo dyed wax, batik, lost wax batik cloth is probably produced more there now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. But that's a message that rarely gets across to local people, and that really empowers them. But in Vietnam, Northern Vietnam, that has been the case. And it continues. That you have to do this, you have to give an economic incentive somehow. Because men and women in the villages want their daughters and sons to go to university in the city and be young people that the modern world accepts and promotes. And those young people really don't want to stay and learn what grandma used to do. So, but that's what it takes. But if you give an economic incentive, then some of those people will stay home because in the end, it's all about making money in the modern world. So follow the money. That's what I always say. Legalization, everything. It's follow the money.
Yeah, and because it is a really labor-intensive plant to, once the cultivation, the whole processing of using the fiber and that. And what, most of them still doing it traditional ways? There's a lot of uh, heavy machinery coming into play now?
No, not in these traditional areas so much. You see that in Europe coming in, the machinery, but even in China, all the Chinese textiles, like the shirt I'm wearing, they're still harvested and processed by hand. The bast fiber strips, the bark, if you will, of the stalks, it ends up being the commodity, and it's sold to a mill that handles it in modern spinning fashion. They break down the fibers and cut them up and spin them, either pure or combined. But the traditional textiles, like the ones hanging behind me, are all done by hand, but these are around 100 years old, both of them.
Wow.
And, but these traditions still persist in some places, but really count them on one hand. The field work I did in the early 90s in Southeast Asia and on into, yeah, after the millennium, there really wasn't a whole lot going on. You know, you could go and collect textiles, but you didn't find people who were making them. And yeah, there's a whole book of my field research and photos that I've never had time to publish, but soon it will happen, I hope. But yeah, it's other cultures, it still goes on. Japan still has some fine hemp weaving, in Korea as well, but that's because it's valuable in rituals. The Koreans use it for Confucian mourning of the dead, of their family, and they wear it during the funeral processions and for a period after the funeral, after the death. And in Japan, it's associated with Shinto reverence. So there are still fine textiles produced for the emperor's household and for some use by serious worshipers, I guess I'd say. So it's the ritual tradition that's backed it up there. And that's also true of the Hmong because they bury their dead in hemp. Hemp's degradable. They try not to put anything in their graves like metal buttons or things like that. They want the body to go back to nature. So that's part of their ritual as well. The economic incentive has helped, and it has in Korea too, because people pay a lot of money for costumes to wear to show reverence, filial piety for their family lineage. So that's, yeah, they pay a lot of money there. And Shinto worshipers in Japan to have hemp things have more money to have the more authentic stuff. But the underlying thing there is ritual all across all three of those.
Yeah, that reminds me because one of the questions that I want to ask you is if traditional hemp farmers are aware, or do they cultivate cannabis for the drug effect, for the THC effect? And when I asked that, as you were talking about Japan, I thought, I think Japan's pretty hard on people using cannabis socially. At least they were a few years ago.
Yeah, well, no, you're right. There's less of a commonality there than one might expect. It's if you want to look at the three cultures again, Japan, Korea, and the Hmong, there is no tradition of getting high on cannabis in any of those cultures, at least not recently enough to talk about. That you can speculate a bit, but that goes back more than 1,000 years. So there's no historical written evidence to such a thing. Medicinal uses, well, that borders on eating the seeds. All these cultures realize that the seeds are a valuable food. That's medicinal, certainly. But as far as using the cannabinoids in particular, not really. But you also get into cultures like in the Himalayas, where people grow it for all three products. This is a great example of triple cropping, which as an agronomist, I see as a future for a lot of cannabis production. You grow a plant that produces fiber and seed and secondary compounds, whether they're terpenes, cannabinoids, whatever. And then a farmer has three products. And that's exactly what they do in Nepal. They grow plants really close together like a fiber field. They plant them early so they get tall. They have a single flower on top, like a big long stick lollipop. And it looks just like Morocco. In fact, traditional Moroccan, not modern day. And then they use the flower they knock the seeds out. And they knock the seeds out by rubbing them. Then they take the charas, the resin, on their hands and use that for a drug. The seeds they eat every day, they bang chortney, they use it every day as a side dish to whatever they're eating, rice and beans or beans and rice, whichever combination. But the chortney is always there in the Himalayan foothills. And then they have the stalks that a lot of groups still weave Bangara, the Nepali blankets, 4-panel blankets, narrow weaving, not much wider than my laptop. And yeah, that's an example of them realizing the medicinal and other values as well as fiber and seed. But that's rare. Turkey traditionally would be an example, but they no longer do this. But the families that made hemp textiles and ate and dealt in hemp seeds didn't waste anything. Nothing goes to waste in a village. That's the pitch. So if there's any outlet at all for the resin or the flowers, the resin really, because the flowers are destroyed by having seeds in them. So you've got to get the resin back somehow. And the simple way is just to rub it off, or in the Turkish way, dry them and sieve out the seeds, and also sieve out the resin. That's powdered hashish. You know, your Moroccan, Turkish, Lebanese, Afghan, Pakistan method. So, yeah.
So what do you have behind you? Where did they come from?
Okay, this piece is from Japan. It's a robe used by pilgrims, basically on Buddhist and Shinto treks between temples and shrines. And as they traveled, probably the calligraphy you see here was written as good wishes before the pilgrims set out. These pilgrimages went for a month or more. And the stamps you see, both in red and black along here, are stamps they picked up as they traveled that commemorate being in one of these temples, shrines. And this is probably from the late 1900s. So it's more than 100 years old, but not much more than that. But these traditions have gone on for much longer. And this is Ukrainian. It's a woman's dress, actually. It's a fine, both of these are pure hemp textiles. There's not blended with anything. The embroidery in this is cotton. The white on white's a bit hard to see, but you'll get a chance. And this is a beautiful garment. This beautiful work on the collar and all this cut work, applique. And I know you can't see it here, but it'll get edited in at some point, and you'll have it. But it's a phenomenal garment as well. This is calf length, I would say. So, are we still on here?
I think so.
Okay.
Curious why I'm seeing the phone.
Yeah, I'll just pause. I heard some background noise, but I'll pause for a minute and then we'll restart.
Oh, actually, Mary Lynn, is it possible for you to tilt down your laptop just a little bit so that your head fills the screen? There we go. That's much better. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
The big head in the
Thank
screen.
you. Don't know what we do without you, Joshua. That's perfect. So anyway, this is this is probably early 20th century, 1920s, 1930s. These are certainly gone by a Second World War. And from the Ukraine, as I said, it's a woman's dress. Basically, from the waist down, she would have worn a apron-like skirt, but then the dress hang out below. And yeah, a bunch of beads, and they look good. This is much the same tradition as northern Romania. This is Western Ukraine, Carpathian region, let's call it. I like my geography better than my politics. It's older and lasts longer.
Last longer. Yeah. So what would be the most like surprising thing you learned about cannabis? I mean, it's an amazing plant, and I've always been amazed when they talk about the new uses it has medicinally. But I mean, hemp products, the plant itself.
I think the basic realization to me was that cannabis is not just dope, you know, and it's not just rope either. It's fine textiles, and it's really nutritious food, and it has all these medicinal benefits. And yeah, that when I really started traveling around and reading more and getting outside of Santa Cruz, I learned that it was really a multi-purpose plant of value as an ancient ally to so many traditional cultures. And that's, I think, the real message. It's been our ally, our good friend, our trusted friend for millennia. In the last 100 years, things got horribly messed up. But prohibition seems endless sometimes, but I think it's just a brief phase. At least when my optimistic soul pops up, that's how I still feel, you know. But hey, Mary Lynn, I met you 25 years ago. You know, it's still a struggle. You know, we all thought normal was going to be great in 72, and has it really been very effective in things? No, social chronicling and things, but what the changes in the laws haven't really come from people at that aim. It's been from business. You know, it's been from people who are finding a good angle to make money from it and push it forward. And those are our people. We're not talking big pharma or big ag. They've been really hardly interested. And now we're seeing research come to bear. My God, I subscribe to all these research publication organs, and I'm busy every day these days. I have a new paper that's serious science about hemp cultivation or a medicinal use or a rare cannabinoid, or I mean, add it up. There's 100 topics that come under cannabis, but every day new research, finally. And that's just because the laws got eased a bit, but only because people took an economic interest.
Yeah, and the jobs. I mean, you're right. There can be so many jobs created from the hemp industry, from the cannabis industry, and it's good jobs, good, you know, good for the environment. Yeah, it's one of those win-wins. And that's it. It's great to see hemp finally getting promoted. I'm into hempcrete houses. That's my vision down the road. I want to have a hempcrete house. But the idea of something mold resistant, healthcare people should be, you know, just so excited about that aspect.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So how about, talking then, turning that to the United States, where we're still full of a lot of regulations for growing cannabis or hemp. Any advice for the American grower, cultivator, American farmer?
Be patient and stay light on your feet. That would be my basic advice. It's a long path over a slippery slope. And maybe our new administration will bring us some kind of federal guidance, which would be beyond the Farm Bill, which is fine, step in the right direction, but it's not really binding law. And its interpretation is up to local variations as well. And yeah, we need an overriding federal policy. Look at California. Okay, we produce most of the cannabis for the United States. That's all drug cannabis. We're not producing much fiber or seed, but it's all cannabis. I mean, Americans suddenly have taken the British notion of calling marijuana and hashish cannabis, and hemp, cannabis plants at below 0.3% THC. This is Farm Bill speak, Farm Bill lexicon, and that's just fine. But people who aren't part of the business have no idea what we're talking about. They think of hemp as fiber and more likely seed that they find at the grocery store. These days, normal grocery stores, hemp seeds are in granola. You don't have to go to a health food store. And fiber is pretty rare still, but everybody's heard about fiber companies. And now suddenly a drug cannabis plant with exactly the same heritage as high THC sinsemilla is called hemp because it has below 0.3% of THC. It's not hemp, it's dope. It's dope with a reversed chemotype. It has a lot of CBD or some other cannabinoid and very little THC. Makes it legal. Okay? It's not hemp by any traditional means. It's not fiber hemp, at least in America. And it's not seed hemp. Okay, it's possible, and people in other areas harvest all three from one plant. Once again, not just in China, Europe. But what's the difference really when it's the same Afghan hybrid heritage and it has high THC and low CBD? Then it's sinsemilla. If you do this, it's hemp. Okay, they're both used medicinally. They're both the same genetics. But what is the difference? It's just the terminology. It's just that. So when you say hemp, please say Farm Bill hemp. And when you say cannabis, not just you, but everybody out there, mean the plant and all of its valuable products and all of the culture that surrounds it and all its tradition. Don't demean that by calling Farm Bill low THC dope hemp. It's not even rope. Sorry, this is my rant for this particular thing. But yeah, it is, as an editor and a guy with a lot of history in the business, it's losing track of the value of this plant. Typical for Americans, but we're focused on one damn thing at a time. Okay, so open up out there, realize that it's for fiber and it's for food and it's also for really good medicine. So.
Yeah, I was in early hearings when Virginia just passed a law, and its first law was just for the high CBD, very low THC cannabis for medicine, and a discussion by one of the individuals on the committee was the drug warrior, the token drug warrior, but a lot of talk about what do we do with all the waste product, and you're like, it's not waste product, use it. But it was like, how do we destroy it? How do we make sure no one gets their hands on it? And you're like, I'm thinking there, the least you can do is compost it. I mean, burn it? What is wrong with you people? But yeah, the idea that plant, every part of it can be used. And the idea of just getting the seed and trashing the rest of the plant or whatever. I have a question about, I know that, like you've said, a lot of other traditions have used it as a seed. And the flour and all that kind of stuff. Do many of them ever grow it just for the sprouts? And I'm thinking, like alfalfa sprouts and different sprouts that hemp sprouts, I would think would be nutritious and tasty.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. The only time I've seen it is in alternative restaurants now and again, or people's homes. But no, I've never seen that as a cultural thing. But I don't think sprouts are really generally a cultural thing either. That's for cultures that have massive supplies of cheap seed. So,
yeah, right. Yeah, it's probably just the seeds are so much more valuable there that they really put them to use as fully as you can.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at this. What do you see in the future down the road for cannabis in the US? And then probably just look globally.
Yeah, I see that I hope what we will see is that cannabis proceeds on all levels, that we recognize that it's valuable for many different things. There are different hurdles for each product, of course. The hurdles for medicinal and adult use is the various legal battles and the economic battles to follow, but it's a bit of chicken and egg. We have the economic battle going on and the rules aren't written yet. So, but anyway, that's a different level than fiber or seed. Seed is taking off worldwide. Countries that produce are increasingly producing. Australia is a great example. The last 2 years, they've doubled their production. China is still a hemp seed exporting nation. It's growing, and actually fiber production is growing too, but at a much slower rate. The problem with fiber in the future is that you need considerable infrastructure or labor or both to process the hemp fiber. If you do it traditionally, you need a lot of labor. If you do it industrially, you need expensive infrastructure. So that's what's holding back, modern hemp clothing, for instance. It's a real issue. A lot of the hemp people think that all you have to do is grow it and process it, but then what are you going to do with it? There's infrastructure required, even if you're going to make crude extracts for eventual medicinal use. It's still some infrastructure required. That's more doable. That's more like moonshining than it is starting a textile mill. But it's all basic entry-level economics. What's it take to kickstart the industry? If we think we're going to see hemp clothing on, branded hemp clothing on shelves widespread soon, no, it may never happen. It can, but somebody would really have to invest a lot of money. And we're here to help if anybody out there has the vision, but it's going to be somebody with deep pockets. Food, on the other hand, and the other uses of hemp seed oil are taking off. You can grow it just like a regular grain crop with a little tweaking, a few different pests, a few different controls, a little different fertilizer, generally the same land you grow soybeans or maize on. And you can use the same harvesters as long as the crop's not too tall. You can still use a normal grain header. So it adapts well to the farming infrastructure that already exists, and the market's there for it. So that's it struggled for a while, but that's now a no-brainer. And it's become part of mainstream agriculture. And fiber can't really become that way. Cannabis flowers and the secondary products from them, the cannabinoids, the terpenes, the aromatic essential oil parts, sure. But as soon as you start producing those en masse, it's commoditized. And then the price goes way down. The price of CBD, it was a great thing to grow 3 or 4 years ago if you're one of the lucky few who had a bunch of CBD. Now people have CBD plants rotting in their barns, and they're trying to figure out whether the landfill will take them or not. You can't burn them. I mean, it's like, okay, I know people who roll them up in bales and put them around the edge of their field for windbreaks. I mean, it's, there's nothing else you can do with it. So, yeah, commoditizing our industry is going to happen. There'll become a flower price, that people aren't going to really get much more than a certain amount, and they'll get a lot less if it doesn't meet a certain grade. It'll just be another tomato or another hop variety if you want to look a little closer to home, botanically. But, the industry overproduces certain hops, the price goes down, certain varieties, other ones get popular. And until there's a lot of it produced, the price is good. As soon as there's a lot of Citra or something produced, then the price for a kilo of Citra has gone down. It's agricultural economics. It's agronomics. It's what people need to take a good look at these days.
I keep talking when I'm muted. When I grew up in Minnesota, we had a family farm in North Dakota in the Red River Valley, flat land, good soil, and all that. And then I'm thinking about in the South, and they're growing cotton, and they talk about how hard that is on the soil and the amount of water it needs and everything. Just in terms of a farmer and growing that crop, what can you say about the benefits to the soil, to the environment?
The only real point of difference, or at least the most important point of difference, is that broadacre hemp agriculture at least for fiber and seed, requires very little pesticide input. But just like maize and other crops, cotton in particular. Hemp is, cannabis plants in general, to be healthy, need a lot of sun, a lot of food, and a lot of water. I mean, it's not a weed. It fine, it survives as a weed and has a few seeds and continues its life cycle the next year as a weed or an invasive species even sometimes. But if you want to produce something from it, you got to take good care of it, just like maize and soybeans and all the other crops. And it takes a lot of water, a lot of nutrient input. You can do it organically, but you can grow maize organically too. So there is organic licensing for hemp products. The USDA has opened that up. So, you know, you can follow that value added chain if you want, and it's good for the environment. But when you start to look at drug cannabis for CBD, THC, or whatever secondary products you're after, they're not friendly to grow environmentally by and large. Some can be grown outdoors and that helps, but when you go into greenhouses and indoors, you're looking at a lot of IPM and a lot of crop loss. That's integrated pest management. You're looking at using beneficial insects as well as environmentally not so unfriendly pesticides that don't kill the beneficials and probably won't kill us either. And but that's expensive and it doesn't work very well indoors. It works better in a greenhouse. You're actually better off to just grow outside. So we push the envelope regularly with, as a group, with indoor growing, especially where people spray pesticides. Here's the evil formula. The weed is still worth too much. Sorry, everybody out there. It's a lovely flower, and I respect all boutique growers. And really, may you find an economic model that works. But weed has been overpriced because of prohibition for decades. Okay, and still because of our spotty enforcement system, you can still get a pretty good price for it, but that's only going to continue to go down. You know, just like property has dips but goes up, this is going down with some peaks, but it's still going to go down until it finds a commodity base. And people don't want to throw away a crop. They'll kind of let their morals slide to spray it 2 weeks before it's going to be harvested rather than lose it, you know. And we need regulation. That's the only thing that can control this kind of thing. And it's the not very convenient side of legalization, okay? But we need this because we need to protect consumers. We need to protect medical users, all kinds of consumers. You know, and they need to get good food, they need to get good medicines, and cannabis is a food and a medicine. You can deviate a little farther with fibers, maybe, but you know, depends on what you want to pay for. If you want to support sustainable agriculture and an ecological future, great, you pay a little more for these things. But it's all economics. I know this whole thing ended up being economic stuff, which wasn't my idea, but you know, I run a consulting company that works internationally, and this is always what you're down to in the end. There's some free advice, folks, but focus on whatever your company does. Pick one thing and a backup plan, and drop all those other brilliant ideas that I'm sure you have. Don't drink your own Kool-Aid. You know, look at the world around you and figure out if you do have a viable model, and then focus on that and do it well. That's the best advice I can give to anybody anywhere. That the cannabis has so many possibilities, it's really easy to get distracted. But yeah, pick one thing you can do it well.
Do it well.
Yeah, that's it.
Very good advice. Yeah. Yeah, for those who don't know, back in, 99, when I published the book, Cannabis in Medical Practice, you and Dave Pate helped do the, for the environment, which was, you know, talking about cannabis medicinally. I think you've said it over and over. the plant, yes, it has therapeutic value in the medicine, but the seed, the nutritional value is medicine. And to me, the hemp, what it can do for the environment is medicine for the world. My vision is that, one of these days, we're not going to see all these restrictions on growing cannabis, but encouraging people to grow it to an extent like they did in the early days here in the United States.
Mm.
Farmers had to grow hemp because it was such a valuable product, whether it be for the ropes or textiles, whatever. But here now it's still like, should we, can we, and that, and yet what you say about the regulations, 100% agree with you. It's when people are consuming it, we need to know we're consuming something good. And someone talked about the dangers of cannabis, and I said the biggest danger we have is the lack of control, whether it be vaporizers, and we don't know. Mini vaporizers are just fine, but using some of these concentrates, how did they make the concentrate? Is the solvent they use to extract it, is that something that's cancerous, carcinogenic, or toxic in some manner? What have they sprayed the plant with in growing it? So it's without certain regulations, it's the contaminants that are the danger rather than the plant, I think. Any other, I guess I'm just, words of wisdom you want to send out to the folks listening? We literally wanted this symposium to be more of a just good practical information for people, to let them know that there is more to the cannabis plant than smoking pot, getting high, that's it. The old stereotype needs to be busted, that this is a wonderful plant for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. That's all I could do is just agree with that. I think that's been the message through our whole interview, really is. Cannabis is a great ally. Don't forget about cannabis. Cannabis has not forgotten about us. So.
Yeah, speaking of which, can you think of any other plant that's gone along with the human race as mutually beneficial?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of them. I mean, you could look at the brassicas, the broccolis and cabbages and that whole bunch. We use them for seed. We use them for a green vegetable. We get oil from the seeds. There's no fiber in there that we use really, except dietarily, and there's no spinnable fiber. And they don't make you high unless you eat too much. But bamboo, we use it for shelter, fiber, food. But once again, it doesn't give us any medicine really. The ashes are good for brushing our teeth, but yeah, there's no plant like cannabis. There's no plant that gives us food and fiber and medicine and guidance and a way to deal with our ever-changing landscape as humans. I mean, it's there for us, and whatever we want to make it. It also makes us argue with each other, which in the end is probably healthy, as long as we don't fight wars over it. So. Mother Cannabis is what I call her. I'm not a spiritual person particularly, I'm a scientist, but there's some guiding force here that's guided my life as a scientist for 50 years now.
Well, and the cultures that have seemed to have used it in their sacred, a lot of sacred activities.
Sure.
And I think a lot of it is just that open feeling you get, the creative feeling you can get when using. And now I'm talking more on the cannabis side of it, but on the drug side of it. But, creativity, there is spirituality. Different people think different things, but I think it's more of connecting with people than isolating. I don't think of cannabis as an isolating drug.
No, I don't either. I mean, look back when people were first starting to use it in our culture in the late 60s, early 70s, it was for parties. Yeah. Somebody had some, you shared it. You enjoyed music, food, sex, walk in the park, whatever. It was about enjoyment. It was about sharing something with somebody. It wasn't about staying home and augering into video games. But hey, that's what kids do today. Give them an eighth of strong Kush and a laptop and a bong, and you won't see them for hours. So that's now appropriate for their lifestyle, right? Or I'm not a value judgment; it's just an observation. We got kids around. That's what they do, So but we didn't do it, but that doesn't make what they're doing right or wrong, My
Different
parents hated rock and roll, so did yours. So whatever.
Well, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely. I wish we could be there in person.
Rob Clarke and ML, thank you for what was truly a tour de force, world tour of the cannabis plant, how we as humans have lived with the plant and continue to grow with it. Robert Clarke, along with Mark D. Merlin, are the authors of Cannabis, Evolution Ethnobotany. Rob mentioned he's with a international consulting firm that is actually bioagronomics. You can find them online, bioagronomics.com. We're going to cut for a quick commercial break to undo, which will set you right if you're not set right, and then we'll continue with my good friend Jorge Cervantes in our cultivation segment. Thank you.
Greened out? Although a marijuana overdose is impossible, sometimes being too high can be a problem. Until now. Meet Undo Soft Gels, the only patented product for the overconsumption of cannabis. Undo clears your head from too much THC, swiftly relieving the discomfort of being too high. Got high but then need to be sharp for an unexpected business meeting? Or the family just stopped in? Undo Soft Gels with a glass of water will help clear your head and help you deal with life. From seniors learning to medicate with edibles, to experienced recreational users, to others trying new cannabis products for the first time, Undo Soft Gels can save the day. Lift the fog. Need a tolerance break to get more effect from your marijuana? Unhaze the blaze. Undo Soft Gels for a tolerance reset. It's the cannabis safety net for being high AF. Get it before you need it. Be prepared, because greening out commonly happens. Getting too high can happen to anyone.
Well, welcome back after the undue break. Our next guest is Jorge Cervantes, world-renowned cultivator, the author of numerous books on cannabis and cultivation, including his Handbook for Basics, the Marijuana Horticultural and Medical Indoor-Outdoor Guide, and his wonderful Encyclopedia of Cannabis. Jorge is going to take us through a PowerPoint presentation, just some of the fundamentals of growing, things to be aware of, things that you need to take into account, and further explore the beauty and magnificence of this plant.
Okay. Hi, my name's Jorge Cervantes, and as you might guess, that's a pen name. I had to have a pen name. It just seemed to work out better. The pen name was good for me because I was able to stay out of jail, and I was able to cross international borders much more easily. I've had fewer problems since I've had a pen name. Now with the internet, things are different. They always put my name in and it comes up. But I had to have this pen name. I couldn't even tell people who I was. Why? Because cannabis was illegal and it was horrible. But now I'm not afraid anymore to tell people who I am. And anyway, I've been at this for nearly 47 years, 38 years to be exact. And this is one of my books that I've written. I'm a cultivation editor, cannabis cultivation editor. And this book right here is in print in 7 different languages. And it's also a bestseller. And it's sold more than 1 million copies. And you can see it's pretty complete. Most people call it the Bible. And I have to say it won that name. And then here's another book that I've written. I've written literally, well, gobs and I don't know, more than 20 cannabis cultivation books. And let me pull this out here. Here's some of the books I've written. And then here's another page of books I've written. And there's magazines I've written for, lots of magazines. So that kind of gives you a bit of an idea who I am. And people, well, they keep buying my work, so it must be all right. I work really hard and I do my research, I do my homework really well. And I do my best to make sure everything's correct. And if it's not correct, I find out and I change it and admit it and move on. So that's just a little bit of background about me in relation to cannabis. I live in Spain. I have been in Spain for many years now, 20 years. Anyway, so let's start in here with this presentation for Patients Out of Time, and I can tell you about this guy. The first frame here is my good friend from the Netherlands, Bernard Bruning. And Bernard, he's a real special guy to me because he started one of the first coffee shops where they sell cannabis in the Netherlands. And he also started one of the first seed shops. And he also started one of the first clone sales or cutting sales of little plants in the Netherlands. But here's the deal with him. He has followed this through, always with cannabis, and now he has started one of the first CBD, lecture series. He lectures in Dutch all the time. If you look him up on the internet, you can find his lectures, but they're all in Dutch. They're a little bit thick for me to understand. I get a little bit of it. But you're going to see a lot of people like this that have been advocates for years that have known of all of the beautiful things that cannabis can do, especially medicinally. Can we hit the next slide? Okay. With patients, you can have patients that grow for themselves, or you can have a caretaker. But patients that grow for themselves, they got to remember a couple of things. Your medicine's going to take a little while to grow. It's going to take 3 or 4 months from the time you put a seed in the ground until it grows. We'll talk about a little bit about that a little later. But not only does it take time to grow, it's physically demanding. So you got to remember that it's really physically demanding because you've got to move pots around, you got to move dirt around, you've got to move pots, containers. You got to prepare the soil, and you got to lift things. So that's difficult and physically demanding. And as well, you've got to irrigate. That's my favorite. I like irrigate. I like playing with water. And then also mulch. Mulch is incredibly important. You'll notice this garden doesn't have any mulch on the soil right now because that's because the soil's heating up. We'll go over that in a little bit. And then you've got to harvest, and harvest is worth a lot of work. It really is. It takes time and energy to harvest. It actually takes about all day. It can take all day to trim up a pound of cannabis. And here's the hardest part for most people. Some of people just have a hard time gardening. They don't have any garden skills. So if you have garden skills, if you know how to grow, I'd say go ahead. If you've got the energy to do it, go ahead. If you don't, well, let's look at the next slide and we'll talk about one of your other options. And one of your other options is to get a caretaker that grows for the patient. Now, one of my favorite caretaker personalities is going to be a relative that grows. Somebody that's got the energy and that's growing cannabis, and specifically the kind that you want. Well, I know Rob Clarke's talking about that as well. So I'll leave that with his presentation. Or you can get but the relatives are great, and I would go there first, or you can get a friend that grows for you. And in fact, get 2 or 3 because, well, you could have, one of them could have crop failure. And this does happen. There can be problems. So you might want to get a couple of different people that grow for you. And you can get an organization that grows for you. Paul Stanford here, a very good friend of mine, and guys, I truly love Paul because he's got the biggest heart in the world. And in Oregon, he is Mr. Cannabis. Well, he grows huge plants like this, and he grows them to give away to patients. He's literally given away hundreds and hundreds of pounds of cannabis, and he does so with a smile. And it's one of the best feelings you can have to give away cannabis. I've given away, well, not hundreds of pounds, but many, maybe 100 pounds, maybe more. But anyway, it's a great feeling. And the caretaker, you got to make sure that they've got enough time, and that also that they're qualified, that they know what they're doing. because otherwise you could have a crop failure, and that's no fun, but it can happen. Let's look at the next slide so we can keep this moving right along. Now, the time to grow, if you're growing cuttings or clones, that's just a little piece that you cut off of a plant. We'll look at one of those pretty soon. It takes anywhere from 90 to 180 days to harvest that plant. So if you've got that plant growing, it'll flower for approximately 8 to 12 weeks. But if you grow it 90 days, it'll be much smaller than if you grow it 180 days. So the longer you keep it in the ground, the longer it will grow, and the bigger it will get. Now, seed-grown plants, they take, you can't harvest them early because, see, they've got to go, the seed-grown plants have to go for 2 months, and then they reach sexual maturity, and then they can be flowered. But you're looking at least 120 days. And maybe you can get by with a little less, but I'd count on that, because always, if you're growing, especially if you're growing outdoors or even in a greenhouse, you've got bad weather. I remember in Northern California when the growers were growing cannabis there, and they had the forest fires, the thick smoke from the forest fires. What that did is it gave less sunlight, and the plants matured later, in many cases up to a month later. So you've got to factor in things like that growing outside. And two, you can have diseases and pests, and both of those can actually be devastating, or just slow your plants down. And any problems you have are gonna add up to less cannabis, less medicine. So kind of hedge your bets, and I always plant more than I think I need, and it's always a good idea. Can't plant enough as far as I'm concerned. Now let's look at the next slide, and we'll go through a couple other things here. Okay, now autoflower cannabis. Actually, I just was showing Jeff's book. This is Jeff Lowenfels' book, and this one's in Spanish, but Jeff will talk to you about his book in English. But he talks about autoflower plants, and he'll explain that a lot better than I'm going to explain it now. But autoflower plants, they just bloom in relation to their chronological age after about 3 weeks of growth. And there's several different caveats about them. If you plan on growing autoflower plants, you definitely should talk to Jeff and definitely see his seminar. And these autoflower plants can be feminized because cannabis has male and female plants. It's called dioecious, meaning two different types of plants. And so that's why I have feminized. So feminized would be like a seedless watermelon, for example. It doesn't have seeds and it's unable to reproduce. But as you can see, these plants are going to be relatively small, but the flowers on them can be very big. These are flowers after they've been manicured. But I can't say enough good stuff about Jeff. Please listen to his seminar if you'd like to grow autoflowers. Then can we see the next slide, and I'll talk about some regular plants or regular plants indoors. Now there's 3 different places you can grow, basically. You can grow indoors, you can grow outdoors, or you can grow in a greenhouse. Well, indoor garden rooms are wonderful, but they've got some things about them. One, they're more expensive, and they're more trouble to take care of and everything, because you've got to manufacture everything. But what I like really well are these grow closets like this on the left. This grow closet here, it's just, you buy it, it comes to your door, they ship it to you, and then you set it up. And it takes an hour, 2 hours to set up, and all of the pieces are there, and they're all supposed to fit. And I like them so well because, especially for first-time growers or novice growers, because everything's there and you don't spend too much money. because I'm really cheap. I don't like spending extra money for anything. So I didn't like the grow closets at first. I had to build my own and all of that stuff. But actually, when it works, these grow closets are wonderful. And like I say, the package deal saves you money. After we look at another growth option in another slide. Okay, now we've got two things here. We've got seeds, which are here, and these seeds are sprouted. You can see the little rootlet coming out. It's called a radicle. Anyway, we've got these seeds here, and there's some really big advantages to growing from seed, and then there's a few disadvantages. The biggest advantage to me is you've got a huge selection of different varieties. And cannabis, since it's an outbreeding plant, has an infinite number of varieties. I think Rob's going to talk about stability and more things with the different types of cannabis. And you can, okay. You can buy these seeds at most cannabis dispensaries, or you can order them on the internet. Usually if you buy them in a dispensary, they've got kind of like a limited selection there. And some of the seed companies got tons and tons of seeds, and they've got really knowledgeable people that are selling them. The market's become quite sophisticated. And then, but it takes about 4 to 6 weeks for one of these seeds to grow a foot tall. And they're also more demanding to start and grow than clones or cuttings. Because like if you grow tomatoes, for example, a lot of people, myself included, a lot of times, just because it's so easy, I'll go to the nursery and buy little plantlets like this and then plant them, because it saves me 6 weeks. 6 weeks of growing that plant, and I don't have to put up with all the little things. But it's a little more difficult, like I say, to start seeds. And you always want to go to a reputable supplier, because good genetics are important. Make sure that the place has good reviews. If you can get a personal review, even better. And then we'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, now cuttings or clones. What a cutting is, and we've got pictures of them here, they're just a little branch that they cut off of a plant, of a mother plant, they call them, because these are all female plants. Female plants are the desirable ones. We throw out the males. We don't like the males. They're not very good. They don't have as many cannabinoids in them, and the cannabinoids are not as concentrated either. So you can harvest these too sooner than seed-grown plants. These plants, you can grow this plant for a month till it gets a little bit bigger, about this big, and then at that time you can induce flowering with the 12-hour nights, and it will start to flower, and you can get these plants to harvest in about 90 days, which is a pretty good deal, and you can get a pretty good harvest on them. And as we talked about, the plants are dioecious. I don't want to get too technical, but we want female plants. And usually, and if they're cuttings, you also know how they grow, because you've got an example of the mother plant right there, and you can tell what that mother plant is. And again, we come back to this reputable supplier. The cannabis industry is not regulated very much, and there's a lot of weirdos out there. Stick with somebody you trust and stay with them, because it'll be worth your time. And then the one bad thing about cuttings to me, or clones, is that they can have diseases in them. The biggest disease that you cannot see is a systemic disease. We'll talk about this later as well, called powdery mildew. And you cannot see that, and it can be infected. And it also could have pests as well, and two-spotted spider mites or red spider mites. Those are the most common types. There's more other mites, but those are the most common, and you usually don't see them. So that's why you want a reputable supplier. Can we look at the next one? Now, you can start seeds or clones. You can start any of these indoors. In fact, that's what I'd suggest to everybody. I'd start them, well, you start them in the middle of, late in winter. I'd start February or March. You can start inside, depending on your outdoor season. But you germinate seeds, and you're going to need artificial light. This light here is a T5 fluorescent light. Now, the T5s put out a heck of a lot of light, and they're super efficient. And there's a lot of different lights that work, and it can get a little bit technical. People will pull your leg on things, especially if they think that you don't know so much. So I'd look into lights a little bit, but keep it real simple. Don't push too hard trying to get the perfect light. Like I say, these T5s are fine. Get them close to actual sunshine. That's good. Or any of my books, they'll have all kinds of information about light. And then also look at this right here. See, these are all the names of these plants that are over here. They got all the names. It's really important to label your plants, because I can't tell you how many people they lose the name. They don't know what it is. They'll get it mixed up. These little tags like this are great, but you might want to actually affix it to the plant. That way you won't lose it. And you're going to need to plant these in some kind of a soil, usually a real light soil or another substrate. Always buy the soil. Buy it. And make sure it's sterile, because this is where you're going to have your first problem. You have tainted soil. And then you're going to need small containers. These, for example, are 4-inch containers. I love these. They're great. You're going to need clean water. When I say clean water, this means water that doesn't have a high salt content. Anything over 300 parts per million. And usually you can just find that out from the municipality where you get your water from, or look on your well report. If you can't get clean water, you may want to use distilled water, or get a reverse osmosis machine or device, and they can get a little expensive. A couple $100 is a basic one of those. And also a clean environment. See, this is all clean. There's no mess around here. Cleanliness is a good deal. Keep everything clean. I'm kind of a junkie for cleanliness, and I have very few problems in the garden because of that. And garden skill and patience are paramount. So if you're going to grow inside, the more experience you have gardening, the better. Can we look at the next one, please? Okay, this is how we germinate seeds. I gotta say, these darn seeds, they cost quite a bit. They've come down in price, but you can pay up to $10 for a single seed. And to me, that's a heck of a lot of money. I mean, $10, my gosh, So you want to make sure that each one of these seeds germinates. So you want to treat it really, really carefully. So you want to soak these seeds in water. I put it in this. I put it in a champagne glass and soak them for 24 hours. What that'll do is it'll loosen up and penetrate the outer shell or cask of the seed. And as soon as you get some water in there, bang! That activates the hormones, and it starts to grow, starts to activate itself. But you can't leave it in more than 24 hours. You leave them in for more than 24 hours, chances of the seed literally drowning, are pretty high. So don't go over 24 hours, definitely. But 24 hours works really well to make sure that seed gets really wet. And right at first they could float, but after a while they'll drop to the bottom of the container. And then you take these seeds and you put them in this towel, a paper towel, and get 3 or 4 paper towels and fold the seeds into it and keep this evenly moist. And the way to do that is you pour good clean water, low part per million water, low salt saline water, and you pour it on the towels and then just tip the plate to drain it off. And make sure they're evenly moist, not too wet or not too dry either. Because if they dry out, man, you just made yourself some serious problems. It could dry out the taproot and it could basically stunt the plant forever. Now, you want to keep these about 70, 75 degrees. You can, Fahrenheit, you can keep them warmer, but you're kind of pushing things. I like to keep it in that range because it's really safe and you have very few problems. And depending on your seeds, if they're super viable, like the ones I showed you earlier, you'll see them germinate within a day, 24 to 36 hours, say. And if they take more than 5 days, they're probably not going to be that great as seeds. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, seedling growth. Now here is a really good looking seedling. See, that stem is nice and strong. It can be purple. This is a genetic reason. This this stem is purple. And it's got the original leaves here. These are the cotyledon leaves, and these are the first true leaves. But these little seedlings, this big, is a couple inches tall, that's already 2 to 3 weeks old, depending on, because it takes a few days to germinate usually. And to get this a foot tall, it could take another, 2 or 3 weeks. So you've got to really factor that in when you grow seeds. And then here it is. Here's the seed after. First it was germinated. We planted it and we put it in this. This is a Jiffy cube or Jiffy 7 cube. And it's got a mesh around the outside. When you transplant it, always cut this mesh off, always. Otherwise the seeds will be, the roots will be impaired and they'll grow slowly. Now, let's look at the next one and see what happens here. Okay, so then once you get these little plants growing, then you put them in, pot them up a little bit bigger, put them in a little bit bigger pot. And this little bit bigger pot here, in this case, is a 4-inch pot. And notice this soil has quite a bit of perlite in it. That's so it drains well. We want really fast draining soil always. But look at these little plants. They are super strong, super healthy. They're very well grown, and they just exude life. Well, you can grow these in containers, and you can either keep them inside, grow them under that same T5 fluorescent. You can also use a T8 or a LED lamps, but it's still going to be expensive to grow. And you're also going to need a secure place to grow indoors. And you're also going to run into more disease and insect problems, nutrient problems, cultural problems, heat, cold, wind. It's, like I say, more everything, more difficult to grow into. Now, or you can take it, and this is my favorite. I start them in indoors, and then I move the plants outside into a greenhouse or outdoors. And that works great because you get a real start on the season. And we'll see how that works in a couple more slides. Let's take a look at the next slide here. Okay, now moving plants into a small greenhouse, you can get greenhouses. There's all kinds of them on the internet. You can find these small prefabricated greenhouses that you only need to use for the beginning of the year. And then after that, you can remove the plants from the greenhouse and plant them in the soil outside. But this was taken up in Northern California, and this is in Garberville in Humboldt County. And what they've done is they made a hoop house. And a hoop house is just simply using Schedule 40 PVC pipe, and they make an arch all the way over over the plants. It's about 12 feet wide. And they take rebar and bury it in the ground here and make these arches and then stretch plastic over it. So it's really quick and easy to grow or to build. And then they put in benches here. See, benches are great because that way you don't have to bend over. And even if you've got a wheelchair, you can wheel up to the plants, and they're right at eye level. So they work really well. And any kind of an old table works okay for benches, but you got to remember there's going to be a lot of water, so it's going to get wet, and you get the wood wet, you might want to just use it only for a greenhouse bench. But these small greenhouses will protect you from the weather in the beginning of the season, and you can also put one on later in the season. And then two, here's the other thing. It takes just a small little heater to heat one of these greenhouses, electric heater, and just enough to take off the cold edge, because if you've got say you've got the temperature outside 35 degrees, 40 degrees, well, to raise it up to 55 or 60 degrees is not too bad, not too difficult. But to raise it from, say, 40 degrees to 70 degrees, that's a lot. So you can grow it, keep it a little bit cooler, and it won't cost as much, and you'll still get your growth on there, especially during the day when it heats up from the sun. And then you're going to have to cool the greenhouse. Usually that's done with a fan or just by opening the ends or open it up high so you get natural convection going there. And then you can either, these are going to be planted either in the soil or in pots. So we'll go over that. I love growing in Mother Earth. It works really well. Let's see what the next slide says to us. Okay. Now these plants, these are grown here in Spain. These are grown outdoors, but the first thing we got to do when we move these plants outdoors is to harden them off. And it's just like you'd think what that is. Indoors, it's really, the leaves are soft and supple, and they're not very tough. That's usually because they don't have any UV light. UV light makes those leaves really strong. So when you move them outside, you've got about a week that they need to be babied outdoors. They can take full sun for about an hour the first day. Then you've either got to move these plants into the shade or put shade cloth over them so they toughen up, but toughen up as they're able to, little by little. That's really important. And then soon these plants are going to be planted all over the garden. Now look, here's this is a sativa-like variety. These are Afghani-like varieties, and these over here these down here are crosses of the two types of cannabis, but they're substantially different. And when you plant outdoors, you're going to need a minimum of 5 hours of sunlight, and you got to protect them from the wind, and also from snails, slugs, birds, dogs, cats, gophers, moles, all kinds of stuff. They got all kinds of things that want to eat them. But those snails and slugs can really get them, especially if there's not a lot of other food for the plants. And then I know some cats, they eat cannabis. It's like a catnip to them. I've had to chase the cats out a few times. So you may need to put up some kind of a fence to keep the cats out. Let's see what the next slide has. Now, this is a real good example. This was taken up in Oregon last year, and outside of Portland. And this one, they started the plants inside. Look how big they are. This is like 3 feet tall right here. That plant's got a heck of a jump on the season, and they put this out like the 1st of April, and the soil was already prepared. These plants were already hardened off by the time they're planting them. They were in pots, and now they're planting them outside. And look at this soil. It's beautiful. It's this is just like really rich, nice organic soil. So they're putting a nice big plant in there, and that thing's the first week or two, you won't notice much growth. But after that, the first week or two, just the roots are going to be growing. And after that, you're going to see this baby take off. It's really cool. And that's one of my favorite things, to see the initial growth spurt after you transplant them. And then also we've got the irrigation lines are already in. And notice there's mulch back here. They're going to put that on the soil later. We'll talk more about mulch in a moment. Let's see what we have next. Okay, medical cannabis care. Okay, you build organic soil, and I don't know, the organic soil, to me, it's the only way to grow. I've been growing organically for years and years, and we always build the soil. And so consequently, once you get the soil built, everything works for you. Everything's much easier. It's really nice. So if you can grow in your own garden outside, wonderful. If you've got to grow in pots, use soil that you find in a bag at the nursery. It's much better, fast draining soil. But in the springtime, you build it, after you've built your organic soil and planted the plants, let this soil warm up in the spring, because that will make the plants grow a lot faster. But really soon, you'd be surprised. This soil will be like 100 degrees, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, really easy on the surface. And like a couple of inches down, I've measured the soil, and a couple of inches down, you find that soil is going to be 80 degrees. Well, that's just too darn hot for soil. Roots don't like that. And you may not know why your plants aren't growing. Well, it's just because the soil's too hot. That's it. So all you have to do is put mulch on the soil. And what I use for mulch, my favorite mulch, is straw. Straw doesn't decompose very fast. You can use alfalfa hay, but that decomposes a lot faster, but you also add nitrogen to the soil. But I like the straw because it's really tough. And right underneath the straw, you've got this great layer of life. And most of the roots in a plant are about this deep. They're about that deep in the top 2 inches of the soil. So you can, you just have healthier plants if you use mulch. And it holds moisture, it keeps the rain from beating up the soil, and you irrigate on it. The water doesn't run anywhere, it just stays on the soil. And you can either pick it up to fertilize underneath it, or put the fertilizer right on top of it, especially if it's a liquid fertilizer. Now let's take a look at the next slide, please. Okay, one thing I didn't mention on the last slide, I wanted to mention that on the last slide, that is a water wand, and that water wand breaks the water up. So since it breaks the water up, it aerates it, and it makes the water penetrate evenly, so which is really a good deal. Now this is another one taken in Portland, Oregon, at one of my relatives' backyards, and he plants outside, so it's less work. And these are the garden beds where they used to grow tomatoes. And it's organic soil, which is less work. They hardly do anything. They put 2 bags of chicken manure on each one of these, and that's it. And they plant in the soil, less work. I'm a big proponent of less work. And they didn't plant in a pot because that's more work. We don't like that. They didn't plant indoors, which was more work. They plant or indoors, which is expensive. But if you plant in a greenhouse, you've got a longer season. Now notice here, these are wood chips. Wood chips work really well for mulch, but underneath this is landscape fabric. So they put landscape fabric down and then wood chips on top of that. That means that you don't have to have a very thick layer of wood chips like that. And then you can, then you have the landscape fabric that holds everything in. That's really a nice and very simple combination. About all you need to do is water these plants and harvest them. That's my kind of garden. I like that. Okay, let's go to the next slide, see how that works. Okay, cultural problems. Usually, okay, this is how it works in the cannabis world. People sell fertilizer. There's a big markup on fertilizer. People always put all their energy into fertilizer. Fertilizer. They got fertilizers for everything, right? And it gets real complicated and stuff. Well, people try to pull your leg on all the fertilizers you need. Well, consequently, all the information, they're spending all their time talking about fertilizer. They're not talking about how to grow the plants. They don't talk about overwatering, underwatering, over-fertilizing, under-fertilizing, the temperature of the container, the humidity in the grow area, the air circulation or the air ventilation. We gotta control all of that stuff. And that's just as important as fertilizer. And here's what happens. This is why I'm showing you this photo here, or this drawing, because this plant right here, the fertilizer builds up in here. So when you wash the fertilizer, the excess fertilizer out, because people are prone to over-fertilizing with liquid fertilizing, liquid or any kind of fertilizer. So what you have to do is wash the extra fertilizer out. And by doing so, once a month, you solve a lot of problems. You don't run into over-fertilization. You don't get nutrient imbalances and stuff. I could make it a lot more complex than that, but this is the easy way to do it. It works great. Let's look at the next slide here. Now, here's another real common one. A little bit of knowledge equals simple, inexpensive solutions. One of the biggest problems people have when they grow outdoors is they put these pots out in the sunlight and the sun hits them and it gets, the pot gets really hot. It's very, very hot. In fact, the outside of the pot, just like the soil, can be 100, 120 degrees on the outside. And then that means an inch inside, it can be 90 degrees, maybe even more. Well, what that does is that fries all of the roots. It literally cooks them. Once those roots are cooked, they can be, they start to rot. And when they start to rot, all kinds of pathogens move in. And it may take somebody 2 months, a month and a half to figure out the problem, because you got to look at the roots to tell for sure. Well, it's really easy to overcome this problem. All you've got to do is shade that pot. Put a little bit of shade on that pot, and it doesn't get so hot. Just this little bit of information right here could save crops. This is a really big problem in Spain when people grow on their balcony. Plants just the roots get too hot. So that's just one of the little tips that'll save you hours of problems and money too. Can we take a look at the next slide, please? Okay, diseases and pests. I mentioned powdery mildew before. Powdery mildew is what that does is just a light white powder on the leaves right here. And there's two big problems: powdery mildew that you see, and then also bud rot, botrytis or Botrytis cinerea. But bud rot is where the flower actually rots. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. Usually it's caterpillars get in there and they start digging around, like the corn earworm is a big problem. Well, that thing gets in there and it poops in there. And then that poop starts to rot, and it draws fungus, and Botrytis cinerea is one of the fungus that it draws. So you've got to cut that out. There's instructions in my books on how to get rid of this botrytis, but basically what you do is you cut it out and sterilize your tools. Now we've got pests. Your biggest pests are spider mites. This is one of my favorite pest photos of all times. Spider mites, which are very small, you can barely see them, or thrips or aphids. Aphids you don't see as often. This one happens to have quite a few aphids on it. But you can get all kinds of little insects or mites on your plants and not even know it. best thing to do is go around. Just look, turn up, and the leaves, they're always underneath the leaves because that's the easiest place to live. It's the most hospitable. Just turn the plant upside down, turn the leaf up, or turn the leaf upside down, and look at it real closely. And you may want to use a little magnifying glass so you can see a little better. But that'll give you an idea. I mean, you can have some real serious problems, especially indoors. This is an indoor plant. Outdoors, you have very few problems. Let's look at the next slide. Okay, there, I was talking about nutrients earlier. Nutrients or fertilizers are actually they're plant or they're elements that you put in the soil or that aren't airborne and stuff. But cannabis is an exceptionally high user of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, especially calcium and magnesium, super high on these two. And most people will liken them to tomatoes, but they still need more calcium. Actually, tomatoes use quite a bit of calcium, but magnesium. You supply both of these with dolomite lime usually, or a supplemental fertilizer. And you can have organic soil, and I just love organic soil. Can't say enough good things about organic soil. And with organic soil, you have very few problems. But as you can see, there's a lot of cultural problems you can have. I mean, problems you can have with nutrients. But with the nutrients, what I got to say is usually they're a result of a cultural problem. Soil's too hot, too cold, or the pH, the potential hydrogen pH of the soil is too high or too low. You run into problems. So, like I say, you can usually head most of these problems off. Yeah. So, but I don't have a lot of time to concentrate on nutrients. So I got to keep it moving to the next slide. Okay, now for the harvest, now this is the fun part. I like the harvest, but I'll tell you, it's a lot of work. It's a lot more work than I want to do. I like to see them grow, and harvesting is kind of like a necessary thing I have to do. But first you determine how the harvest is when it's ready, and that's been done, okay? And the next way to do it is, the next thing to do is to remove the big leaves. Now these big leaves have a lot fewer cannabinoids in them, very few. So you just want to pick these off and pick them off with the leaf stem and everything. This petiole right here, or leaf stem, you want that off because that's one of the things that can rot later if you don't watch it. So I just go through and pick these off real fast. It doesn't take much time, and you can tell I've already cut this plant at the base. I'm taking these leaves off, and then you save these, throw them into a paper bag, and you can take it. And then once you throw them in that paper bag, just let them dry in there. Turn them every few days, but they make a great cooking stock. You can make butter out of them, and you can use the butter for all kinds of different recipes. Okay, or you can just cut individual branches off and treat them individually. These plants are about the right size to cut the entire plant. And this one was cut at the base. And then later you'll manicure the flowers. I'll show you how a little bit about that. And then you hang the plants to air dry. So let's look at the next slide, and we'll see some drying here. Now these plants have been manicured. Actually, they're individual branches, and you can see these leaves, or I mean these flower buds, are really nice and strong. Excellent stuff. But they've been trimmed really closely with scissors, and that works really well. But it's pretty time consuming to just hang up the flowers like this. If you've got a small harvest, it's okay, but it takes up quite a bit of room as well. And these, since they're so dense, it's going to take quite a while for them to dry. It could take maybe a week to 8-9 days, 7 to 9 days, I'd say, for these. And then now these, I love these hanging shelves. These are net shelves that are really easy to store. They collapse into a small package, and you can take these shelves And you can put about a half a pound of cannabis flowers on each one of these. But you manicure the flowers and set them on these. If you've got a big harvest, this is the only way to go. And so you can see this will hold about 2.5 to 3 pounds of cannabis. So one of these goes a long ways. And two, there's a couple of things about these. These are about 2 feet across. That's my favorite. The 3-foot ones are a little bit long. It's hard to reach across. So you might want to consider just the 2-foot ones. But this is a good deal for drying. Let's go to the next one and see what we're looking at. Now, how do you know when it's dry? How do you know when it's dry? Well, the best way to learn when it's dry is just to weigh it, weigh the moisture content, see what it says. This flower bud right here was taken off, and I dried this flower bud right all by itself, separately, kept track of it actually. But when it's wet, it weighs 15 grams. 15 grams. That's pretty heavy. But when you dry it out, this is after about 5.5 days of drying, this bud, this flower right here, lost about 75% of its moisture. And also along with that, during that time, it also lost pigments and other things that are adulterants really for consumption. Those things disappeared too. So you want to make sure and dry it at least 4 days minimum, because otherwise you won't get rid of the pigments and the other things, and this will taste green, kind of like hay or something. It's really unpleasant. If you should vaporize it or smoke it, it's not so bad if you mix it with something else. Mix it to make butter or something, but it's much better to get rid of that moisture relatively slowly. And then make sure you get rid of all of that moisture, because if you don't, it very well could develop some mold. And so remember this, you're going to need a space to dry, and that should be cool and dark. Well, not that cool, like 60 degrees, 65, 70 degrees. And you're going to need the time to dry. And you're going to want to keep the temperature or the humidity about 50 to 55% is ideal. But that will tell you more than anything else when it's dry. Or if you were to roll this into a cannabis joint or a cigarette, it's called, and light it and it burns, then you know it's dry enough if you don't happen to have a scale. But weighing it on a gram scale is the absolute easiest way to go. Now let's look at how you're going to store this here. That's in the next slide. Okay, package and store. Okay, the biggest problems with cannabis once it's dry, the biggest problems it's got are oxygen, air, oxygen oxidation. That's why they call it oxidation, because it oxygenates everything. It oxidizes, not oxygenate, oxidizes thing. And that means it's decomposing, okay? Heat, you want to keep it relatively cool. The cooler you keep it, 80, you don't want to keep this at 80 degrees, closer towards 50, 60 degrees, or even 40 degrees, the better. You want to watch not keeping it too cool. If you keep it really cool, the humidity can jump up and you can get condensation inside of here. So what you want to do is you want to put it in an airtight container, preferably glass. And once it's in this container, it's still going to be a bit moist. So what you want to do every day or two, well, every day, right at first especially, you want to open the lid here and literally burp it. Just let some of that moist air out of there, and then you'll have it'll escape. Because see, this stem, since it's a denser material, it holds more moisture than a thinner leaf. So it takes about a week or so for this to equalize out. but just burping this 2 or 3 times at first few days, and then once a day after that, you get a nice even cure on your medicine. This will take you up to the point of, fresh flowers or dried flowers to consume. And then, there's other people that are doing seminars on how to concentrate this and everything. But but I like to store my cannabis in in jars, and I always look for this seal on the top so that it's airtight, so nothing can get into it. And let's go to the next slide, and the last slide is the next one. And I can't tell you how happy I am to show you my face and not have to wear this disguise. I wore this disguise for approximately, for more than half of my career, 3/4 of my career, till about 10 years ago. I had to wear this disguise. Now I don't. I can wear my own face. I don't have to hide. You don't either. Some people are afraid to grow. Some people believe some of the crazy stuff that the politicians have told us about cannabis. It's all wrong. That part, what they have given us, has been bad news. What we have today is good news. And you can see, you can grow really big plants or you can grow really small plants. It's all up to you, but a plant like this will give you enough medicine for several years. So I hope you like the presentation, and I know we've got questions coming up later. I would be happy to answer them. Oh yeah, last thing. If you want to look for my books or anybody's books, I'm kind of partial to mine, but if you want to look for books, the best, least expensive places to find cannabis cultivation books is on Amazon. And they ship and you get them in a couple of days. So that's the presentation. I hope you like it. And like I say, we're going to have question and answers. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that come up. Thank you so much and happy gardening.
We need to talk about your cannabis. 40% of your terpenes just evaporated this week. That's 40% of the effectiveness, flavor, and aromas gone. Each day your flower is stored without the original terpene shield, more are lost. What is happening? What is responsible? When your cannabis isn't humidified, the trichomes are those tiny fibers on the plant surface. Anyway, when those trichomes shrivel up, you lose the terpenes. And when you lose the terpenes, you lose almost everything good about the cannabis effect. But there is hope. Boveda protects your cannabis with a monolayer shield of purified water, retaining the terpenes and increasing your cannabis aroma 5 times over. Save the terpenes today and experience cannabis like never before. Whether you're storing in large bins or if you have a travel stash, it all starts by choosing the perfect Boveda for you. Save the terps. Only with Boveda.
Michael Green with ML Mathre, thank you. I mangled another one. Live from the beautiful ballroom, downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, the Omni Hotel. In a moment, we're going to engage with a conversation live, because we love technical glitches, with Jeff Lowenfels, author of, among other things, DIY, Auto-Flowering Cannabis, Raja Roots, as mentioned before, teaming with nutrients, teaming with fungi, teaming with microbes, are 3 of the books he's written. For 45 years, Jeff has written a column, weekly gardening column, former attorney, but writes about gardening every week, published in Alaska. He's going to talk to us a little bit about auto-flowering cannabis, and then we're going to be joined by my good friend, Jorge Cervantes, to discuss the 3 of us, and the 4 of us, discussing cannabis, its growth, its cultivation, how it nurtures us as we nurture it. Jeff, please.
Okay, I'm here, up here in Anchorage, Alaska, and I can't think of a better place to take a little toke of medicinal substance, and what a terrific conference that you people are putting on. What a great cause. So here I am, sitting up here in Anchorage, Alaska. We have a terrible problem up here when it comes to growing weed. You either grow it indoors or you try to grow it outdoors, and you waste a tremendous amount of time and energy. And why do I say that? Because we have a photo period like no place else anybody who is listening to this has. When you grow cannabis, it requires nights that are longer than the days, as you well know. In Anchorage, Alaska, that occurs after the equinox, which is September 21st. It also is very cold after maybe September 1st. In fact, it can freeze September 21st. And that means you're not going to get a crop because it takes a number of weeks, a month, maybe even 2, for your flowers to develop and to ripen. All right, so we got a real problem. And in fact, most places, in northern latitudes, and I say, almost even from the state of Washington up, certainly into Canada, has this same problem. All around the world, the same problem. And of course, down below, you have the same identical problem. Cannabis is a photoperiodic plant, and it's got to have that special long night before it goes into flower, and then it has to develop those flowers. That's a problem. And it's a problem which has now been alleviated. If I was showing my regular presentation, I'd go through the whole blibber blabber. But the bottom line is there's a third kind of cannabis that most people have never heard of. I'm trying to look like George here, by the way, much to my chagrin. I haven't had a haircut in a year, and I just got my last vaccine, and I'm about to have the locks shorn, but I'm glad I've got an opportunity to show it to George. In any case, there's a third kind of cannabis other than indica and sativa, if you believe in that particular breakdown, and it's a ruderalis. It's a wild third kind. Forget the genetics. Some people don't think it's anyway. It was discovered in Russia back in the 1920s by a scientist who was studying hemp. He found this stinky little small plant that it was weird because it was definitely a cannabis plant. And it went to flower without a photoperiod problem in the middle of the summer. Wow. Here was something that had evolved to be able to handle growing in climates where the photoperiod was just simply not right for survival. So evolution does what it does, and these plants survive. Well, he forgot about it. Everybody forgot about it. A couple of people maybe picked up 1 or 2 tries and tried to breed them a little bit. And what you got were little teeny plants, and I mean teeny little plants. When you bred them with sativa and indicas, they didn't produce very much. And if you dared talk about them in public, people would laugh at you because they didn't have any THC in them. They really weren't of any value, and so people forgot about them. But there was a small group of breeders, and in the 60s they bred these guys, and in the 70s they finally came out with the first one that was commercial, and it was capable of producing small plants with THC in the flowers, but again, they were very, very small. If you got on a listserv then and talked about them, they laughed their heads off at you. So eventually, autoflowering.net, you should write that down, it's still in existence, was started. And autoflowering.net is the place to go to get all the information you need, so you don't have to ask any questions, seeds, blah, 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 advice, you can get it. Of course, you can also get it in where is my wonderful book? You can get it here as well. It's upside down and whatever the heck it is. This terrific little book is for people who really are beginning growers. It's not for an advanced grower. It's for Uncle Bob and Aunt Sally. It's for the vet that wants to grow these things, because after people stopped laughing about them and took them seriously, and in particularly over the past 3 or 4 years, autoflowering plants have become the thing. And I go out on the limb and I say 2 things about them. First, for regular gardeners, where it is legal, and even where it's illegal for that matter, autoflowering cannabis is the next tomato plant. It's wonderful. It's easy to grow. It grows just like a tomato. You treat it like a tomato. You grow it in tomato soil. You use a tomato pot. anything that you grow a tomato in, you can grow these things in. They are tomatoes. Notice, incidentally, that tomatoes have trichomes, as do cannabis. But in any case, if you can grow a tomato, you can grow these. And here's the bottom line. Not only do they not have a photo period problem, so you can grow them in any kind of light, they grow from seed, and I'm talking to harvest, not the beginning of flower, seed to harvest in some of them. I got one right here, 45 days. Now that's going to be a small plant, but the ones that take only 90 days are lovely, beautiful, and really delicious plants. And you can grow them right on the windowsill. If you're fortunate enough to have a tent, you can put them under daylight for 24 hours. I like 24 hours, 18 to 24 hours, and you get beautiful plants. Here's my little pet right here, one of them. This one just sort of grew in Alaskan light. And it's in a little teeny pot. No big problem. You know, if mom comes and you want to go hide it, you just put it in the closet. It's wonderful. Oh, and the odor. This is the next tomato. Now, if you're a commercial grower, and I'll finish up here because, again, you can buy the book. You know, that's everything I got to say is in there. Or, you know, you can just try growing them yourself. If you're a commercial grower, auto-flowering plants are the way to go. And I say that for a couple of reasons. I used to say it because you could put auto-flowering plants in between your normal plants. They're small enough, and they only grow 2 or 3 feet. The super ones grow up to about 3 feet. They're usually about 2 feet, 2.5 feet. They're all colas, incidentally. This one happens to be a little stretched out, but they're all colas, unbelievable. You know, you can get grams, like 80, 90 grams off of a cola. Anyway, when you grow them on 2-foot centers by themselves, forget the other kind, on 2-foot centers in Oregon, on an acre of land, you end up with 6,000 pounds of plant, and most of it's flower. You try that with indica and sativa in Oregon, and if you are the best in the world at growing, you'll get maybe 4,000 pounds. Most people will get 3,000. So they outgrow in terms of mass, and as a consequence, a number of commercial growers are only using autoflower. And when you go into a dispensary these days, you can't tell the difference. This plant over here has a THC content of 25%, if that's what you want. If you want to grow CBD for medical purposes, bingo, you can grow these. There are low THC or no THC autoflowers. This is the future. Now, again, if you're a commercial grower, think of the space savings. Think of layering 3 or 4 different shelves. Unbelievable. And the lighting, oh gosh. This is it, folks. Auto-flowering cannabis. And if you're a patient and you want to grow your own, this is, don't even bother growing other kinds of cannabis. It's just a waste of time. If you live on a condo, you live on a farm, you live in an apartment, this is the way to go. In 90 days, you'll have 2 or 3 jars full of the most delicious cannabis you'll ever grow. And I just have to add, because they're such wonderful people, you put in one of those little Bovida packages and it'll last, well, in my house, it only lasts for about a week and a half because it's all consumed. But it'll last forever with that Bovida. And with that, I'm going to end.
I'll tell you, one of the things that really amazes me about these autoflowers is for commercial.
Wait. First, I have to say, God, I haven't seen you in a long time, you know?
Yeah, I know. Gosh,
we haven't smoked weed, and God knows, I don't smoke, I vaporize, but we haven't done it in a year.
Gosh, yeah. No, I've been over in Spain for the last year and a half.
I've been stuck here in Anchorage. COVID, man.
Oh, man, so you're stuck up there.
Which is why autoflowers make so much. I mean, I haven't gone to the supermarket. I'm not going to go to a dispensary or my dealer. So unbelievable. You grow autoflowers. It's just, I converted a closet and I got about 5 or 6 plants growing all the time. I just harvest and
Just keep
consume.
putting them in. Huh. That's a good deal. I'm gonna grow some this year on the terrace, and I'm just waiting for the weather to warm up. It's only about 50 degrees now, and it's just like really cold. So yeah, well, I'm kind of amazed about autoflowers because I didn't think they were going to do that well in the beginning, but later on, what I saw was for agriculture, they're perfect. Because, and the main reason is, well, there's several reasons, but a big one is you can plan the day you're going to harvest them. And when you can plan the day you're going to harvest them, that means you can put in another crop right after that. And it's not contingent upon the weather. Because I remember.
And you can get 2 or 3 crops a season.
Yes, exactly.
For hemp? Oh my God.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, and then, well, there's several other really good things, about the photo period. I remember when they had the big forest fires in Northern California, it took longer. The plants took another 2 weeks before they were mature because they didn't get enough sun that they were used to, right? So what happened?
People lost crops. They had to start another quick crop.
Yes, exactly. So there's that, and then also you can handle them with a machine, because that's a big problem when you've got 50 hectares. That's a big harvest, and how do you dry that? How do you process that?
Right, and you don't need ladders. There's this wonderful picture of you, which I use in my slideshow on this particular subject matter, actually, where you're on a ladder, doing an interview with somebody with the biggest plant I've ever seen. It must be 15, 20 feet tall. So, these are really the way to go. And I remember, I always love to tell this story. I remember back in the day, I like to take credit, folks, for George writing cannabis books. Now, it may not be true, but I like to tell this story that we were at a garden writers conference. It must have been 5 years ago.
Man,
and you and I went and got a cup of coffee. We got a cup of coffee at a drugstore before they had coffee shops. Nonetheless, dispensaries, I might add.
Right.
We probably got stoned as hell up in the room illegally, of course.
Always,
came down
always.
And went to get some coffee. And while we were there, you said to me, because you were publishing books, I got some of them over here. You were publishing reprints of vegetable books and some fun stuff, but they were cannabis books. And then you said to me, I'm thinking, you think I could write a book on cannabis and not get in trouble and make some money? You think I could do that? And I went, yeah, God, yeah. And you did it. Now, of course, you were going to do it anyway, but I like to take some credit for Jorge Cervantes.
Oh, man, Jeff, you've helped immensely. Let me see if I can. There it is, the little white one.
Oh, look at that.
That's the first one, 1983, that came out.
Oh, I have an autograph.
Well, it was a whole different world back then. I had to wear a disguise. I mean, you remember those days, crazy days.
I know. And my son, who was all of 11 or 12, I didn't want him smoking cannabis, but God, he loved the book, and it had this guy with sunglasses, and it was just, to him, it was the height of subterfuge and wonderfulness. And he was so thrilled to learn that you were a real person, that I knew you, and he got to meet you, and it was terrific. But if we had known about autoflowers back then, oh my goodness gracious.
Actually, it's kind of funny because on Neville Schuenmacher's catalog, the seed bank, I was just looking through here.
Wow.
There's a picture of where the heck is it?
Of an autoflower?
Yes. Yeah, it was his first catalog, actually. Here it is. Right here.
Oh my gosh. Look at that. Yeah.
First catalog, and that was 1987.
Yeah. And the genetics back then were okay. But I mean,
it was okay. That was taken alongside the road in Hungary, right?
Yeah.
And those plants are all over the place. In Kazakhstan, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the genetic range of this plant is huge.
So why didn't we? So we ended up in America, of course, it's because of the illegality. You know, our OG breeders went over to Afghanistan and and brought back hash plants, which are really the basis still. Unless people are using land races, and which they are more and more. But it's just still the basis of the cannabis industry, isn't it? I mean, the hash.
There's about a dozen different root plants.
But why didn't they get more of these? People
just get stuck. There's only a few people like, Rob Clarke and Dave Watson's another one that really looked outside the range, because what most people have been trying to do is develop drug cannabis just for high THC. They didn't care about branching. They didn't care about root structure.
And they didn't care about medicine. They didn't care about medicine.
Or the other cannabinoids. And something else that I found in, traveling all over is that all these people went out, well-meaning people went out to find seeds. They also left a lot of their seeds. So those seeds mixed with the landrace varieties. And in Colombia, it's huge like that. Mexico too, but Mexico's quite a bit different. They don't mix as much. And in Colombia, the cannabis growing area is just in a few places. Well, those guys, what they do, they communicate. They've got a tribe, or a confederation of tribes. So they all share seeds all the time. So when they share seeds, everybody's growing the same stuff. And you really lose a lot of the diversity that was available as short as 20 years ago. It's amazing.
And it is amazing. But there's lots of things we do that are sort of crazy.
Right.
But since we're talking to in theory, we're talking about using this plant as medicine, and you and I both are trying to promote people to grow these at home. Certainly to buy organic, et cetera, et cetera. I'm doing a new book. I don't want to talk too much about the subject of the new book because I don't have the contract with a publisher yet. But one of the things that's become incredibly clear is that we do a couple of practices growing cannabis we've got to stop right away. And one of them is we many people, I shouldn't say we, but I hope nobody who's listening to this ever does this again. We try to sterilize our seeds before we plant them, or we plant them in sterile soil. Those seeds are coated with very special bacteria. And the reason why I mention this is that those people that you're talking about in those groups that are sharing, the bacteria that are on each individual seed that's a landrace is the bacteria that plant has always grown with. Those seeds carry the bacteria on to the next plant, and it goes on, et cetera. And so we got to be careful that the idea that we use hydrogen peroxide to clean the seeds. We got to stop doing that. I used to do it last month. We just got to stop doing it. That's not a good idea based upon tremendous amount of information.
A lot of times it depends on where the seeds have been and everything, I mean, in the tropics, for example, and real humid weather, there's a lot of stuff that wants to eat your seeds.
Well, there is a lot of stuff that wants to eat your seeds, which brings up a second point, which is that it's really, they need a little bit of moisture. We put them into little containers and we put a little dryer, desiccant in it. They probably, and really I should talk to the people at Boveda, they probably would do better. I know this sounds contradictory to everything we've ever done because we worry about mold and fungi. Mold is fungi.
Right.
They probably should be stored with a Boveda.
Maybe.
That's an interesting thought.
Hey, it's funny
research.
When you change things over to organics. A lot of problems are solved immediately.
Yeah, they are.
I remember Kevin Jodrey. He was producing several million clones a year, right? And gosh, it was an open place. He didn't have it sterile. All he had was a great big fogger that would fog out compost tea, aerated, activated compost tea. And all the problems were gone. They didn't have any problems. That was his only control.
Well, that's right. And so people who are thinking, I can't grow, I don't have a clean environment, or that cleanliness, the micropropagation uses, sterile plants. It's bad. You got to put the microbes back again to get them to operate properly. You and I know that, of course, and so does of course anybody that's going to be consuming cannabis. It's got to be organic, or you're killing yourself, or risking killing yourself. It's kind of crazy.
There's not really that many people doing micropropagation that like at home, or it's only for big stuff. People talk about it, but they don't actually do it. Most people cut clones, and it works great.
Yeah, but again,
excuse me, Jorge.
Hey,
Jeff.
Michael.
Trying to get in. You guys, it's
You're
like
having a good
you don't
time.
even think we exist. How are you? This has been great.
We don't
I have a question.
need you guys.
We have a question.
We know.
We have a question or two from the audience. Speaking of micro and microbiomes and regenerative, one of our viewers has asked us if either one of you or both of you can comment on the production of culinary microgreens. Have you seen anything or come across that? Whether it be sprouts or some way of using a plant in a more embryonic stage.
Tender microgreens in a salad.
You mean cannabis plants?
Yeah.
Cannabis or hemp, yeah.
You know how you have alfalfa sprouts?
Alfalfa sprouts, Brussels sprouts. How about cannabis sprouts? That question came up earlier.
I've had them. I mean, haven't you ever had hemp seed?
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Of course you have. Everybody's had hemp seed. Well, sprout them. There's no reason why you can't sprout them. They're just like sunflower seeds or anything else. Yeah, of course you should sprout them. Of course they've got, as soon as they're green, well, even before they're green, but yes, of course.
And I think the comments you had about not sterilizing the plants, that makes so much sense, because we're learning even the human body, our microbiome, we need those bacteria. So it makes sense that the plant needs its own bacteria as well.
We are bacteria.
Yeah.
I mean, they need the bacteria. Well, let me just I'll get into this quickly because I don't want to take all the time, but I've been reading and talking to and working with only because I'm asking him questions and he's answering them. A guy named James White, who is been doing a lot of research on a thing called rhizophagy, the rhizophagy cycle.
Yes.
And as a result, I've been seeing conical laser microscope pictures of plant after plant, cannabis root after cannabis root. Thank you very much to my lovely wife. Cannabis root after cannabis root, full of bacteria. And I don't mean on the surface of the outside of the root. I mean inside the cells. So there's more coming. I'm working on it, and he's working on it like crazy. It's unbelievable. So the plant literally takes in the bacteria, strips off and eats the stuff in the cell walls, multiplies the cellless naked bacteria, spits them out after they cause a root hair to form, and then they grow back the cell wall and they bring them back in again. And every single plant that produces hairs has these. Now, I'm just going to make a big leap because I haven't looked, and I'm sure it's being looked at as we speak. Those tomato plants and those cannabis plants have trichomes. What's a trichome, George? It's a hair, right?
It's just a plant hair. That's it.
Bingo. I'll bet you dimes to a donut. We look in there carefully with these conical microscopes. They're full of bacteria. So anyway, just to put it all out there, bacteria are where it's at. Sterile soil, sterile seeds, sterile plants, sterile growing environments. Unless you got a real serious problem, is not where it's at.
Yeah, we've been growing organically for years. That's the only way to go.
Yeah. What else you got, Michael?
Not too much. I think you guys have been nourishing us. You've told us a little bit how to nourish with the plants. This has been actually pretty fabulous. obviously, the longer I'm exposed to cannabis, the more not comprehensive isn't even the right word. It becomes like the embodiment of like everything that's possible. ML touched on earlier this morning, there, and you have, both of you in our conversations, that there is certainly a dynamic, a spiritual component to the plant. There's a consciousness to the plant. The various things, ways it shows itself in the female form, or even the male. Just what it has to show us, the guide it can be, the lessons it has to teach us, that it can bring us back to the land, that is sustainable, that it's fundamentally about wellness, and maybe not a panacea, but truly the broad spectrum. We say the ensemble, the spectrum, the totality of the spectrum that embraces us as we embrace the plant. And we're going to have Tina Gordon on in a little while, who talks about regenerative growing, but her experience. So maybe there's one last thing you can both touch on that doesn't go so much to the fundamentals or the mechanics of growing, but perhaps if both of you just take a moment to reflect on the impact of what you've gotten out of your gardening or dealing with the plant, and whether or not you find it nourishes you on some level. What has enlightened you to be? A little, the illumination.
Oh, yeah. I mean, definitely, it's changed my life. I remember we were taught in school that if you smoke cannabis, you would, next thing you know, you'd be shooting up heroin, and then you'd be murdering people. We were taught that, actually taught that. And when I learned that that wasn't true, which I couldn't wait to smoke. I mean, it's like, the same day I was out there puffing away. I was, I want to see if I'm going to do heroin now. And it never happened. And I was, like in high school. And I thought, gee, these guys are pulling my leg. I can't trust them anymore. What's going on with this plant? And what it turns out, little did I know, I didn't even know back then that there was in the 70s back then, that there were cannabinoid receptors in the human body, and I think pretty much all mammals have them, cannabinoid receptors. So that meant humans developed along with cannabis. And it's a whole new branch of medicine. It'll control different functions within the body. And we've been getting cheated by all of those guys that were pulling our leg this whole time. And now they're trying to do it again, So it's like, it seems like this never ending thing. It's like, well, we got to make sure that cannabis gets a fair shake because, in that way, it's been really amazing for me.
Yeah, and they think we're in the alternate reality. You know what I mean? When we consume cannabis.
Oh, not at all.
I think growing these plants resulted in my writing the books, and writing those books resulted in an appreciation that this guy is not a stupid, insensitive organism that can't run away. That I'm more superior than it, that I've got a brain it doesn't. In fact, you learn that the same bacteria that control me control this plant.
Yeah.
We're all here just for the bacteria. They control us, fungi, plants, and everything else. And that the way these guys work, I'm telling you, when this next book comes out, you won't need, it is a mind blower what these plants do. It is incredible. And it used to be things that people just thought they did. Now we've got videos showing us plants doing these things. I'm just going to leave it at that. What I've learned is that plants are amazing. Don't take them for granted.
I got to show. A friend of mine showed me this book the other day. It's Jeff Lowenfels' autofluorescent book, or autofluorescente, como lo dicen. Autoflower. Yeah, that's it's in Spanish.
Qué bonita. Muchas gracias. Las flores en español. So Jeff and Jorge, we do have another question, and that goes to
another question from the audience is, what would you say the difference between the quality of a plant if grown indoors in a closet type setting versus outdoors versus greenhouse?
Oh, okay. There's that. That's a big,
Big topic,
big thing.
right?
Cannabis, indoor cannabis is usually costs quite a bit more. You can control the environment real precisely and everything. There's no wind or rain to beat the plants up. I like outdoor cannabis a lot better. Uh, Things with outdoor cannabis is they can grow a lot bigger, they're a lot stronger, they have a lot fewer problems, but it won't fetch the same price. It doesn't look, it's called bag appeal at the dispensaries. It doesn't look as good. Um,
I don't
and
know. I don't know if you
I,
use the right autoflowers. I plant mine right in with my pansies and everything else. They look great.
oh yeah, I know. See, that's what we need, a landscaping book. We need a
Yeah.
landscaping book with cannabis.
I am a former landscape contractor. I've smoked with both of you,
Well, there
spent
you
some time.
go.
So number one, as a bookseller, I want to thank both of you for producing books and continuing to produce books. And I would love to work with you on a landscape book as well. That would be a lovely thing to do. Where else do we want to take this? We have a couple minutes left. Is there any last minute thing you want to share with us?
Hey, let me
Want to touch on regenerative or organic? Take it to a different location, or one piece of advice, whatever it is.
Let me answer the question that you just asked, George.
Please.
You know, you can make any environment like any other environment. It just takes money, as George pointed out.
Right.
Again, to my way of thinking, if you're using the right kind of living soil and you're treating your plants properly, and living soil is another way of saying organic, I think that's fair to say, if you're following the principles of the soil food web, let's put it that way, you're going to be able to grow phenomenal cannabis. Now, you might be able to grow cannabis that's a tad better indoors or outdoors, or in a greenhouse. But if you're using good living soil, your cannabis is going to be in a range that's going to be very acceptable. And it's going to be on the other end of the spectrum from plants grown indoors, outdoors, or in a greenhouse that aren't grown organically in living soil. And of course, with all the regenerative, spiritual, and everything else that goes with being organic. So anyway, that's all I got to say.
Yeah. Organic's 100%.
See.
Got to stay organic. It's like without thinking. Without thinking, it's got to be organic.
That's right. Me too. I agree. Yeah.
So let's conclude with this. From Anchorage, Alaska, to Barcelona, Spain, and Charlottesville, Virginia, on behalf of Patients Out of Time, everybody that's listening, thank you so very, very much. I do look forward to seeing both of you gentlemen in the very, very near future. I plan on crashing on your couches, and we'll talk some books as well as plants. Namaste.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Our pleasure. Me gusta, señor.
Okay, venga.
Estela.
Hasta luego.
Bye-bye.
Sí.
Sí.
Salud.
So we'll go to a, thanks guys.
Jorge.
We'll go now
Muchas
to,
gracias. Love you, brother.
we'll go now to, we've got plenty of folks here who've wanted to give a shout out for our 25th anniversary. I think, is Martin Lee set to go?
Martin Lee.
Martin Lee with Project CBD. He's coming to us out in California.
Hey, Patients Out of Time. Michael Green again. It's my pleasure to be with Martin Lee, cannabis activist, director of Project CBD, and frequent habitué of Patients Out of Time conferences. Martin, good to see you.
Thanks very much. Great to be with you. Yeah, I think the first time I went to a Patients Out of Time conference was in, it was 2004, 2005. It was in Santa Barbara. And in those days, it was very rare to be in a situation at a conference or otherwise where you had occasion to interact with doctors and physicians, scientists, activists, patients, and others, all who were involved in some way or another in the medical cannabis world. So these were rare events and very important events. And I became a regular attendee and also a speaker occasionally at Patients Out of Time. And when we launched Project CBD back in 2010, really one of the first people we turned to was Lynn Mathre of Patients at a Time, who gave us a very strong endorsement. Remember, in those days, CBD was was really not really known by many people, and we were just introducing it into the medical cannabis community in California. And really gave us a great boost and gave us a chance to introduce CBD and cannabis therapeutics, in another dimension. I think I spoke at Patients at a Time it was in Tucson in 2011 about CBD. And you think back at that period, it was really before it became a national news story. It was before Little Charlotte's story was broadcast by CNN. So Patients at a Time is really ahead of the curve when it came to CBD and cannabis therapeutics. And we really appreciated that. And it's been an essential conference over the years. And when we talk about medical cannabis, not just the information we would learn from the doctors and the patients and the scientists who are involved in this community, it was the community itself that was really important, and it continues to be. So I think it's a somewhat overlooked and neglected aspect of cannabis as a therapeutic herb. It's the fact that it's a community building botanical that brings people from many different backgrounds together in a very unusual way with great potential. And I think it's that community building aspect of cannabis it's a very important aspect of the healing dimension of the herb. So that's why it underscores it's not just the information one can receive by attending a conference of Patients at a Time. It's that direct interaction with people that's part of that community. And these days, because of COVID, we can't meet directly. It's too bad, but it's important nonetheless that we have occasion to meet digitally, as it were. I compare it a little bit to CBD as an isolate versus the whole plant. CBD as an isolate, well, it's like sort of a Zoom meeting, a Zoom conference. It's good. It's glad we have that as an option. It's not quite what we want. We really want that direct interaction. We want the whole plant experience, the whole community experience. And that is what Patients at a Time has delivered over the years in such an important way. And I'm very, very grateful for what I've learned through Patients at a Time and through the help that it's given us patients at the Project CBD over the years. It's been a great relationship, and I look forward for that continuing.
Well, thank you for your kind words. In a matter of speaking, what you've said is kind of a metaphor, especially as we look at the virtual reality of this appearance as opposed to the conferences. It is the whole plant. It's the whole planet. It's the entourage. It's the ensemble. Thank you so very, very much. Look forward to seeing you at our next live conference, Martin. Thank you. Be well.
Take care.
Stay safe.